Let me say something before the story begins, and I pray you hear it clearly. People don't always break your heart by shouting. Sometimes they do it by quietly stepping over you like you never mattered. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived through enough storms to know when a cloud is forming long before the thunder starts. I wasn't born into wealth or fame or anything shiny. I came from red dirt, sun-scorched porches, and a world where women stitched hope into fabric and made meals out of pennies. I was married once to a man named Raymond. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was mine, and we built a life out of love and sweat. When cancer took him, I learned grief doesn't make a sound, it just sits in your house like unwanted furniture. That day, I became both mother and father to my son. Matthew grew up gentle. The kind of boy who apologized when store clerks bumped into him. The kind who asked if I'd eaten before he did. The kind who used to hug me so tightly I'd feel the whole world soften. Sometimes at night, after a long shift scrubbing offices, I'd stand in his doorway and whisper, "You're gonna grow into a good man. I can feel it." Everything I ever did was for him. Every sacrifice. Every prayer. Every dollar I tucked away in quiet. I wasn't saving for myself. I was saving for his future. When he met Danielle, something in my chest tightened even before I knew her name. She came over that first Sunday dressed like she walked off the cover of some fancy magazine. Not a hair out of place. Not a crease in her voice. She smiled pretty, but it was the kind of smile that didn't hold warmth. I looked into her eyes and saw thin ice. Women like me notice things. I still opened my home to her. She ate my cornbread, sat at my table, listened to my stories. But she never saw me, not really. She only saw the parts she wanted to fix or replace. She complimented the house like a realtor touring a fixer-upper. She laughed politely at my jokes, but never with her heart. She called me Miss Evelyn, formal like I was a stranger. But I didn't say a word. My mother taught me something long ago. Don't judge love by the first season. Sometimes spring takes time to show itself. I wanted to believe that. Then one afternoon, Matthew walked in, face red like he was holding in a surprise. He pulled Danielle close, and she flashed a ring so bright it caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered it across my old wooden floors. "We're getting married," he said. Those 4 words pushed back the sadness I'd been storing up. I placed my hand over my mouth, and tears spilled down my face, not from fear, but joy. I hugged them both. I imagined a celebration filled with family and music and laughter. I imagined our traditions becoming their foundation. I pulled out my notebook that night, the one with lace ideas from Grandma's old quilt, cake recipes, my mother's hymns for the ceremony. I even wrote down the address of the little church where every woman in our family had walked down the aisle. I pictured myself helping Danielle into her dress, fixing her veil, praying over their union like a mother should. I should have known life doesn't always unfold the way you imagine. A few days later, they came to visit. Danielle opened her laptop, showing pictures of venues with crystal chandeliers and tables so shiny you could see a reflection in the plates. She talked about modern elegance and clean aesthetics. I listened quietly. When she finally paused, I offered my notebook. "I have a few ideas," I said softly. "Family touches. Something handmade. Something special." She didn't take the notebook. She didn't even look at it. She just smiled that thin smile and said words I will never forget. You should stay in your lane. Like she was doing me a favor by letting me stay silent. I waited for my son to speak. To say something. To tell her that was unkind. He didn't. He kept scrolling, pretending he didn't hear it. In that moment, the world I had built for decades cracked, not loudly but quietly, like a picture frame falling in another room. I didn't argue. Didn't shout. I simply folded my notebook, placed it into my purse, and left the room. That was the beginning of the silence. Days passed. No updates. No calls. I found out about the bridal shower from a friend who posted photos online, women smiling around a table, champagne glasses raised high. No one saved me a seat. I saw the catering decisions through my niece. Found out about the dress through a cousin. Every little detail passed around like whispers in a story I was no longer part of. A wedding I'd prayed for. Planned for. Saved for. Not once did Matthew call to ask, "Mama, are you coming?" Not once did Danielle ask for guidance. I kept telling myself, they're just busy. It's just stress. It's not personal. But a mother always feels when the door is being closed in her face. Then one afternoon, I went by to drop off a casserole. On their counter was the printed wedding program. I glanced at it just for a second. My name wasn't there. Not under mother of the groom. Not in acknowledgements. Not even as a thank you. As if I never existed. I placed the casserole on the table, kissed my son on the cheek, and walked out before he could see the way my heart was breaking. That night, something in me changed. I stood at my bedroom mirror and saw the lines in my face not as age but as history. Years of sacrifice stared back at me. That's when I remembered the savings account. I hadn't checked it in so long because love made me trust blindly. That account wasn't small. I built it dollar by dollar, season by season. Every penny represented a moment I denied myself something. That money wasn't mine, it was for his future. I sat at my kitchen table, hands trembling, thinking about logging in. My stomach twisted. I made tea. I cleaned the counter. I avoided the truth like it was a storm I wasn't ready to face. Then came the moment that changed everything. My niece Zoe walked in, young, bright, not the kind to ignore warning signs. "Something's wrong," she said before I spoke a word. And I knew she saw straight through me. Because the moment Zoe opened that bank account and turned the screen toward me, I realized I wasn't just being left out. They were using my kindness like an ATM that never said no. Zoe didn't walk into my house that day like someone passing by. She walked in like someone who knew she was needed. She set the grocery bag on the counter, brushed her hair out of her face, and looked straight at me. "Auntie, what happened?" she asked. Funny thing is, I wanted to say nothing. I wanted to pretend like everything was fine. But when someone loves you for real, they don't accept the lies you tell yourself just to keep from breaking. I poured tea into 2 cups, sat down at the kitchen table, and finally let the words out, not like a flood, but in slow drops. I told her about the planning I wasn't invited to. I told her about Danielle's words cutting into me like glass. I told her how Matthew swallowed his voice to keep the peace. Zoe didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix it with fake comfort. She just listened with her whole face. When I finally mentioned the savings account, her expression changed. "You have access to it?" she asked. "I do," I whispered, "but I haven't checked it in a long time." Her voice softened. "You need to look." A part of me didn't want to. I wasn't scared of money. I was scared of the truth I might find attached to it. But Zoe reached out, put her hand on mine, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "You earned every cent in that account," she said. "You deserve to know where it went." We carried the laptop to the kitchen table. I typed in the username and password with fingers that didn't feel like my own. It took only seconds to load, but it felt like the longest moment of my life. And then the screen lit up. For a moment, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The balance was far smaller than I remembered. The numbers looked wrong. I clicked transaction history. There it was. Payment after payment. Hundreds, then thousands. To vendors I never approved, names I didn't recognize, stores I never stepped foot in. $1,800 to a boutique. $3,500 to a venue in Atlanta. $920 to a catering company. $450 to an invitation service. $1,600 for decorations. The list went on. Every time my heart pinched with shock, Zoe typed and clicked faster. She pulled up statements, dates, receipts, confirmations. Her face tightened as she read. "Auntie," she said quietly, "they used your money for their wedding." I stared at the numbers like they were written in another language. All the years I spent saving. All the little yes I gave to my son and the no's I gave to myself. All those nights I skipped meals and accepted hand-me-down shoes. All those mornings I ironed uniforms for rich families while my own house needed repairs. My sacrifices were being spent without my voice. Not my permission. Not my presence. Not even my knowledge. I didn't break down. I didn't scream. I didn't even let a tear fall. Real pain doesn't always make a sound. I closed the laptop, stood up slowly, and said, "I want to print every single one of these." Zoe didn't argue. She grabbed her purse, and we drove to a little print shop in town. I was still wearing my house shoes and a sweater that had seen better days, but I walked in with the dignity of a queen. I printed every page. Every transaction. Every receipt. I gathered it into a folder, and for the first time in months, my shoulders straightened. Zoe glanced at me and said, "What now?" I said nothing. I didn't need to. The next morning, I put on my good coat, the gray one with the pearl button I always saved for important matters, and went to the bank. The same teller who'd seen me deposit pennies for decades smiled and asked if I was making a deposit. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm here to withdraw." She typed in my name, and her eyebrows twitched when she saw the statements. She asked softly, "Is this for something special?" I looked straight into her eyes and said, "Yes. For my peace." With the same quiet calm you'd use to fold clean laundry, I withdrew every penny. Not out of anger. Not out of rage. But because I finally understood something. They didn't just exclude me. They used me. And my son let them. I walked out of that building with the same folder of statements pressed against my heart. That afternoon, my phone finally rang. Matthew. No, hello. No, how are you, Mama? Just. Why was the venue payment cancelled? His voice wasn't broken or sad. It was annoyed. Embarrassed. Like I had inconvenienced him. I took a breath. I stayed in my lane, I whispered. The same lane your fiancé told me to stay in. He hesitated, caught between guilt and ego. You could have talked to me, he muttered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You had weeks to talk to me. But you were quiet. More silence. Heavy. Dense. I could hear the voice of the little boy he used to be, buried under the grown man he became. I didn't think it would matter, he said. That was the moment I felt the truth cut deepest. I wasn't just excluded. I was considered unnecessary. Before I could say anything else, he hung up. Not slammed the phone, but ended the call like someone turning off a faucet that had been dripping too long. Then came the text. Not from my son. From Danielle. The words came fast. You ruined everything. You embarrassed us. You crossed a line. You're jealous. You're trying to control him. I read every word. I didn't type a paragraph back. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I wrote one sentence. You wanted a wedding without me. So now you have one. I didn't block her. I didn't respond again. I didn't need to. I had found a new language. Silence. I put the phone down, poured myself some tea, and sat out on my porch rocking chair feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Stillness. I didn't regret withdrawing the money. I regretted wasting my heart on people who didn't treat it gently. Something shifted inside me that day. A door closed. A boundary formed. A lesson rooted itself deep. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I had been waiting for them to include me. But I had forgotten to include myself. But you think that was the end? No, honey. The real storm hadn't even started. Because soon, the wedding fell apart, the truth came out, and my son came back knocking on my door with a story I never expected. For the first time in months, my home felt like mine again. I opened my windows and let the afternoon breeze slip in. I played old gospel songs on low volume, the ones Raymond used to hum while shaving in the bathroom mirror. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful. But peace has a strange way of drawing storms toward it. 3 days passed. My phone stayed silent. Not a single call from Matthew. I wasn't surprised. When pride gets bruised, some people would rather limp away than admit they stumbled. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't chase after explanations. I spent those days doing things for myself, something I hadn't done in years. I cooked dinner just for me. I curled up on the sofa and watched the sunset paint the living room windows gold. I even pulled up my old sewing basket and fixed up a quilt that had been sitting unfinished for ages. That quilt reminded me of the life I had built stitch by stitch. But peace is always temporary when people are determined to drag you back into chaos. It was late on a Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door slowly, and when I opened it, there stood Danielle. Not my son. Not a relative. Not someone with kindness in her hands. Danielle. She didn't bother waiting to be invited in. She stepped right across the threshold like she owned the place. "We need to talk," she said sharply. Her voice was louder than it needed to be. Not because she was angry. Because she was scared. I didn't move aside. I just folded my arms and said, "This is my home. If you want to speak, you can do it on my porch." She rolled her eyes, but she stepped back outside. "What were you thinking?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you caused? The wedding planner canceled. The venue wants new paperwork. All because you pulled the money." I leaned against the porch railing and studied her face. For the first time, I saw a crack in her confidence. Not fear of me. Fear of losing control. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. "The money you were spending?" I said. "It was mine." She scoffed. "It was for our wedding." "No," I corrected. "That money was for my son's future. And his future does not include disrespect." Her mouth opened like she had a comeback ready. But I kept going. "And sweetheart, if you needed my money that badly, you should have asked. I might have given it. But you expected it. You felt entitled to it. And that's the problem." Danielle took a step closer. "You're just jealous," she snapped. "You're jealous because you're not number one in his life anymore." I actually laughed. Not a bitter laugh, a tired one. "Darlin', I was number one for decades. I changed his diapers, wiped his tears, fed him when he didn't have enough. I taught him what love looked like. I don't need to compete with anyone." Her face twisted. "You ruined the wedding." "No," I said softly. "I saved myself." She stared at me like she didn't understand the language I was speaking. And that's when I realized something. She thought love was ownership. She thought marriage meant control. She didn't understand the difference between being chosen out of love and being chosen out of fear. Before she could answer, a car pulled up in the driveway. My son. He stepped out and walked toward us, shoulders tight like the whole world was pressing down on him. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. He looked older than he did a month ago. "Mama," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I could have said no. I could have slammed the door. I could have let him sweat in his own silence. But I still loved him. Love doesn't evaporate, it just changes shape. I nodded once and pointed to the rocking chairs on the porch. Danielle started to follow him, but he stopped her with one gesture. Not now. The way her face fell told me more than any conversation ever could. Pride bruised. Control slipping. She stood on the driveway seething while Matthew sat beside me. He didn't speak right away. I didn't rush him. Sometimes silence is the only truth big enough to hold all the pain. Finally, he said, I didn't know. I kept my voice calm. Didn't know what? That the account was yours, he said. I thought you put the money in both our names for us. My heart ached, but I didn't let it show. I put my name there so I could give, not so y'all could take. He looked down at his hands. Hands I had held when he was little. Hands I would have held forever if life hadn't pulled him away. I should have asked, he whispered. Yes, I said. You should have. And I should have defended you, he added, voice wobbling. When she told you to stay in your lane. When she left you out of the planning. When she spoke to you like that. I nodded. You should have. I didn't comfort him. I didn't soften the truth. Sometimes love needs to be sharp. But then his voice broke. Mama, I'm sorry. 3 words powerful enough to crack open every wall I had built. We sat like that, 2 people trying to pick up pieces without knowing where they belonged. I didn't rush forgiveness. I didn't offer it like a free gift. Sorry isn't enough, I said. He swallowed. I know. And that was the moment something shifted. Not because I forgot the hurt, but because he finally saw it. Before he could say more, Danielle stepped closer. Are you coming with me or not? She snapped. Matthew didn't move. Didn't even look at her. I'm talking to my mother. Danielle's face turned white with rage. Is this what you want? She barked. A mother who controls everything you do? Matthew stood up, not aggressive, not angry. Just clear. She doesn't control me. She raised me. And that means something. I almost forgot how tall he was. He stepped off the porch and walked to the car with Danielle trailing behind him. They argued. Loudly. Wildly. The kind of yelling that shatters windows and hearts. I didn't chase after them. I didn't try to fix it. I just sat in my rocking chair and watched the wind sweep leaves across my yard. Minutes later, Danielle sped away, tires screeching across the pavement. Matthew didn't get in the car. He just stood there beside the porch, watching the dust settle where she once stood. That was the day the wedding started falling apart. But the real shock came later. Not when Danielle left. Not when the invitations were thrown out. It came when my son told me the truth about what was really happening. And that truth changed everything. Matthew didn't rush into the house after Danielle drove off. He stayed there on the porch steps with his hands inside his pockets like a grown man who wasn't sure where to go next. I watched him for a moment, studying him the way a mother studies her child the very first time they fall and don't cry. Come sit, I said. He didn't need convincing twice. He walked back up the steps and sat in the rocking chair next to mine. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The breeze picked up across the yard, shaking the branches and leaving gold-colored leaves tumbling across the grass. Fall has a strange way of reminding us that everything we cling to eventually changes. Finally, Matthew spoke. You probably think I chose her over you. I let out a slow breath. I don't think it. I saw it. He nodded, jaw tightening like someone holding back a confession. I didn't want there to be a problem. Every time you tried to help, she acted like it was a threat. I tilted my head. Did you ever ask her why? His silence answered before he could speak. She didn't want you involved, he admitted. She said your opinions would make it harder to plan the wedding the way she wanted. And you agreed? I didn't agree, he said quickly. But I didn't argue either. There it was. The truth we both already knew. But it's different when someone says it out loud. Words have a weight that thoughts don't. She didn't want a marriage, I said softly. She wanted control. Matthew rubbed his face with both hands. I thought she just needed time. Time doesn't fix disrespect, I replied. It only reveals it. He stared at his shoes, shoulders slumped. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't defensive. He was just a son being honest with the woman who raised him. I knew you were saving money, he said, but I didn't know how much. I didn't know how long. I didn't save that money for myself, I reminded him. I saved it for your life. Not to pay for someone else to erase me from it. He swallowed. She told her mom that since we were building our future, everything in the account belonged to us both. She said you didn't need to be consulted. I closed my eyes for a moment. So that was the story she'd used. That account wasn't just money. It was my heart. It was every shift I worked when I was sick. Every night I stayed up sewing clothes instead of sleeping. Every little inch of sacrifice tucked away for my son to have something better. Matthew's voice broke. I should have protected you. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the answer. He looked out at the yard and said something I didn't expect. Mama, the wedding is cancelled. I turned toward him sharply. Cancelled? She called her parents after she left here, he explained. Told them she wasn't going to be embarrassed in front of her friends. She demanded they cover the venue costs, and when they didn't, she said she wasn't getting married. She packed her things this morning and left. And you let her? I asked. He shook his head. There's no letting someone who already made up their mind. We sat with that for a moment. He stared at the house across the street. I watched the horizon. The world looked different when truth settled into the open. I loved her, Matthew said. I really did. But I kept waiting for her to love you too. That, I said gently, was your first mistake. He blinked. Why? Because if someone loves you, I answered, they don't get to disrespect your mother. If they can't honor where you came from, they can't build a future with you. He looked at me the way a child does when they finally understand why the stove was hot and why you told them not to touch it. I was blind, he whispered. No, I corrected. You were hopeful. That's different. The porch fell silent again. I rocked back and forth slowly in my chair. I remembered holding him as a baby, the way his tiny fingers wrapped around mine like he was clinging to the whole world. He turned to me. Mama, I'm sorry. Those words cracked something open in me. But forgiveness doesn't come like a sudden rain. It's like the slow thaw of winter. I'm not ready to say it's okay, I told him gently. He nodded. I didn't expect you to. But I'm glad you told me the truth. He looked relieved. And tired. And older than he was when this started. He asked softly, "Do you hate her?" I shook my head. No. Hating someone takes too much energy. I just see her clearly now. Then his voice dropped even lower. I thought money and a big wedding would fix everything. I thought the fancy things would make us look successful. Baby, I said, a real marriage don't need glitter. It needs grace. He closed his eyes like he was hearing that for the first time. You see, when someone is choosing the wrong road, you can warn them. You can talk. You can cry. But they won't change direction until they feel the weight of the wrong choice themselves. He leaned back in the rocking chair. I don't know what comes next. You start again, I answered. But you start wiser. He nodded slowly. Then he asked the question I knew would come eventually. Can I come inside? I looked at my front door. The same door he once walked through as a young man with dreams and confidence. The same door he shut on me when he let someone push me out. I stood up and said, "Not today." He looked hurt, but he didn't argue. He understood. Sometimes distance is the beginning of healing, not closeness. Will you call me? He asked. When I'm ready, I replied. He nodded, stepped off the porch, and walked to his car. He didn't speed away. He didn't slam the door. He just drove slow, like someone carrying a heavy lesson in his chest. When the taillights vanished down the street, I went back inside. The house was quiet again. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt something else. Strength. I walked into my kitchen and whispered to myself. A woman who knows her worth never begs for a seat. I fixed myself a cup of tea and sat down in the rocking chair. It was the first time in a long while that I didn't feel like someone's mother first. I felt like a woman reclaiming her own name. But the story didn't end there. Because a few weeks later, when life finally settled and the dust cleared, something happened that changed everything forever. Not for my son, but for me. It wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about what I discovered about myself. And that ending? It transformed everything. The weeks after the wedding was cancelled were quieter than I expected. Not the aching kind of quiet, the kind that feels like the world is finally catching its breath. The storm had passed, not because someone fixed it, but because I walked out of it. I said no more waiting for calls. No more checking for apologies. No more wondering if the people who hurt me would wake up one day and understand. I spent time with myself again. It felt like remembering a song I used to know by heart but forgot how to sing. I cleaned the porch, painted the steps sky blue, and opened the windows just to hear the wind whistle through the curtains. On Sundays, I baked biscuits for the church ladies. I sat with them on that same porch where I watched my son walk away, and we talked about life, marriage, loss, and the weight of expectations. It felt good to laugh again, deep laughter that shakes the room. One sunny morning, Zoe came by holding a stack of flyers from the community center. She asked if I would be willing to teach one of their cooking classes. You have wisdom in your hands, she said. You don't just feed people. You make them feel loved. I didn't realize how long I had been waiting for someone to say that. I didn't ask if she was sure. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. My first class was small, just 6 young women. They came with their own stories. One was getting divorced. One was newly pregnant. One was trying to start over after leaving a toxic home. But when we started cooking and talking, something happened. They weren't students anymore. They were women sharing scars and strength like recipes passed down through generations. I taught them how to knead dough properly, how to let it rest before stretching it out, how to season with feeling, not measuring spoons. But most of all, I taught them what my mother taught me. Food is not just survival. It is love made edible. After class, one of the girls hugged me and said, "I wish I had someone like you in my life sooner." I told her the truth. You always did. You just hadn't met her yet. I didn't realize I was talking about myself until later. Life didn't magically become perfect. Some days still felt heavy. Some nights still brought memories I wish stayed buried. But little by little, I noticed something important. I was becoming whole again, without the apology I thought I needed. It was late fall when Matthew finally came back, weeks after that day on the porch. This time he didn't come angry or ashamed. He didn't come for answers or explanations. He came because he had changed. He stood at the bottom of the steps and asked, "Mama, can I sit with you?" I nodded and pointed to the rocking chair beside me. He didn't rush into a conversation. He didn't try to convince me of anything. He just sat there looking at the leaves falling across the yard. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "About you. About the kind of mother you've been." I waited. I realized I let someone come between us. I let her convince me that your love was a burden. I stayed silent because the truth doesn't need decoration. He took a deep breath. "I should have listened to you from the start. I should have defended you." "You should have," I agreed softly. He nodded. "I know." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg or cry. He just said the words I didn't expect. "I want to be better. I want to earn your trust back." Trust is not something you hand out like candy. It's fragile. It takes time to rebuild. But I saw sincerity in his eyes. I reached over and put my hand on his. "I don't need you to be perfect," I said. "I just need you to be honest." He swallowed hard. "Thank you, Mama." We sat like that, side by side, letting the late afternoon sun settle over us. He didn't stay long. When he left, he didn't ask if he could come in. He didn't rush ahead of himself. He just hugged me gently and said, "I love you." I didn't say the words back out of habit or obligation. I said them because I meant them. I love you too. But here's the part nobody tells you about healing. It doesn't come from other people changing. It comes from you deciding that you deserve peace. After he left, I sat on my porch and listened to the wind. I remembered all the nights I stayed awake wondering if I'd lost my son. I remembered all the times I cried in silence so I wouldn't disturb the world. And then I began to understand something I had never known before. I didn't lose anything. I gained something. I gained the strength to walk away. I gained the courage to choose myself. I gained the wisdom to set boundaries that don't break. And more importantly, I realized love doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. Love doesn't mean accepting silence as respect. Love doesn't mean shrinking so someone else can grow. Love is choosing peace when the world wants you to choose chaos. Love is knowing your worth even when others forget it. Love is saying no more, even when it hurts. I thought the end of this story would be about a cancelled wedding or a broken engagement or a moment where everything fell apart. But it wasn't. That ending was small compared to what I discovered. The ending was not about losing someone. It was about finding myself. And if you're watching this right now, if you've ever been forgotten, dismissed, used, or pushed aside, you need to hear this part clearly. You don't need permission to choose yourself. You don't need approval to set boundaries. You don't need anyone's validation to walk away from disrespect. You deserve peace. Not someday. Not eventually. Not when they finally wake up. Today. I stayed in my lane like they told me to. But they didn't know my lane was paved with strength, sacrifice, and love. And when I chose that lane over their disrespect, I found peace waiting for me there. And that, my child, is the part of the story that matters.